Thank you so much for joining us today. Very, very excited to jump off with this first appointment of the Find Your Power series. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the brand No Gods, No Masters. I'm Millie Demori, the founder, or have been following our account. But we are, NGNM is a cycling brand, apparel brand. We design and manufacture cycling clothing for just women. And our mission, besides designing, high quality, made in Italy garments, is to be an inspirational brand, so that as women cyclists, we can acquire that confidence and that freedom to achieve our own goals, off and on the bike, obviously, small or large that they may be. So we truly believe that emancipation starts from within first. And we have designed a series of appointments with this goal in mind, which is to offer you tools that you can always resort back to whenever you need or want to. And they go from mechanical to nutrition to training. And at the end of the session, I'll give you a little sneak preview of what's coming ahead after this session here. But so we call this series Find Your Power, because knowledge is power. And when you pair knowledge with practice, it's an incredible catalyst to really plug into our own personal power socket, and then we can really sprint in our lives. Today with Michelle, we'll go over a few topics and possible issues regarding the bicycle. We'll address 4 areas of interest. One would be the brakes, and we'll address both the disc brakes and the calipers. Then the rear derailleur and how to index gears. And then lastly, the chain, everything you need to do and know about keeping a healthy chain, and what to do if the chain breaks when you are out on a ride. Enough with me talking, so I'll leave you with Michelle Noble-Hansard, who is an amazing bike mechanic and racer in the US, but not only, she's part of Les Internationales. She's a women-only team, amateurs team from the UK, who will be riding the whole Tour de France 21 stages, one day ahead of the guys, the pros, to raise awareness about gender inequality in cycling. But enough with me talking, so here it is, Michelle Noble-Hansard, aka Michelle the Mechanic.
Hey everybody, how are y'all? Y'all doing good? Thumbs up. So I'm in Texas, so it's morning here, so good morning to you from Texas. I am a bicycle mechanic here in McKinney, Texas, and I'm honored to be here and be able to teach you guys a few things. So I'm going to get right to it. First, I'm going to start off with disc brakes and kind of explain a few things. So I know that there's several different noises that you can hear from a disc brake. A lot of it could be a sound, and that would be if your rotor is bent. And the way to see that is you can get a flashlight and shine it right down into the caliper and spin your wheel and watch it and see if you can see daylight on either side of the rotor. That's one way to check it. And if it is bent, then you try to find the spot where it's bent, and you get a special tool. It's this guy right here, and this helps you to bend the rotor in the right direction of whichever one it needs to go away from that brake pad for. So another issue that can happen if the rotor is bent really bad, then you don't want to try to mess with it yourself. You do want to try to take it in, because it might be to where it's not repairable. And if that's the case, then you're going to have to replace a new rotor. So then let me see here. We've got the squealing noise. So this is the main complaint that I hear from a disc brake, is the squealing. That can be caused from a few different things. It could be the type of equipment that you have, whether you have, you know, a cheap pad or a cheap rotor, then it's going to cause you some issues. And no matter what you do, it's eventually going to squeal. So then there's also the factor of contaminants from the road. And that is the major factor, is the contaminants. So with road bikes, you know, the oils from the car, they get up on the bike whenever it rains, whenever it's wet. And so it'll get all over your disc as well as on your pads. And so the thing to do when that happens, there's different ways to take out your pads. Some you have to use an Allen wrench. Some have this simple little pin that you bend on the back side, and then you just pull it out. And then you take the pads out like this. And you don't want to touch the pads because that can get contaminants on it, and that's what we're wanting to get off. So with you want to drop the wheel out of the frame, and you want to clean your rotor really well. Now they do make some products for that, but honestly, some rubbing alcohol, that works just as well. So you want to get a clean rag and some rubbing alcohol and just spray the rotor down, rub it real good, clean it real good, get it real good and clean. With the brake pads, the easiest way, instead of using any kind of chemical, is to sand it, just lightly sand it. And so you just take something that's not too harsh, but you'll want to kind of sand it in a circular motion like that. And you can see a little bit of a difference. My pads aren't too bad, so there's not a lot of contaminants on it that I need to get off. But you do that, you don't want to wear it down too much because that just is unnecessary wear to your pad. So after that is done, if you still have issues with squealing, then it could be your equipment. And so you want to try to find a different brake pad. Now, I used Shimano brake pads, and these are great. I don't have any kind of issues with these Shimano pads. I've never had squealing except for when I got a contaminant on my brake pads. And mountain bikes, it doesn't happen too often. The mud actually kind of cleans it off. And so that helps it to be clear and get rid of the squealing, oddly enough. But for road bikes, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So one thing aside from cars, the oils on the road that can cause it, is if you have hydraulic brakes like this, then if the seals corrode inside, it can start to leak out onto the caliper. And so one thing you want to check your bike for is to see, is there any kind of oil or grease that's around and on the caliper? Because if there is, then you need to go get your lines checked. You could have a seal that has busted or is corroded. If your bike SRAM uses dot fluid, and dot fluid is very corrosive, so that can break your seals down to where you'll have to replace them more often. You'll get oil on things, and your brakes might fail. So you definitely want to get that checked out if you ever see any kind of oil on your brake calipers. So, you know, first check for oil, make sure that that's not the issue, and clean it real good no matter what. If there's no oil, then it's probably just debris from the road and riding. And so keep it clean. Maybe you can, there's a brand, the Gaffer pads that Amelia actually told me about. And those, I studied those, and they look like a really good brand. They are compatible with multiple kinds of calipers, so you can find which ones that would fit your bike there. You also want to make sure and check for wear on your pads. So a disc pad, it's about 3 to 4 millimeters thick. Let me get that back out. So brand new, they're about 3 to 4 millimeters thick, and you want to replace them when they're worn down to about 1.5 millimeter. If your discs, if they get too hot as well, that can also cause squealing. So then the way to fix that is sand it. Just sand it down. So are there any quick questions about disc brakes or any clarification that's needed for cleaning? I'll allow a few minutes for that real quick, and then I'll move on to the rim brakes. Anybody? Doesn't look like it. All right, let me take this bike down. I actually don't have disc brakes on my road bike because of the squealing, how it is such a common issue. I'm in Texas, so we don't have mountains here. So I don't have to, stop abruptly or really hard with a disc brake. They're really great for going down hills for your descents. Let me get this bike out of the way real quick. Okay. So now moving on to pads. One thing I also want to point out real quick is if you have a bike stand at home, I do not suggest working on your bike with it clamped onto your frame. That can actually crush your frame, or if it's carbon, it can crack it. I'm not working on the bike right now. This is just for display. So I have it like this for now just to hold it. But yes, please do not ever clamp it on your frame. Always use the seat post. Make sure that your seat post is tightened really well. Okay, so for rim brakes, you have your brake pad, and you want to make sure that this guy is A, for the right type of wheel that you have, and B, soft to your nail. You want to be able to kind of squeeze it with your nail. And if it's a little pliable, then it's in good condition. These can harden. They dry rot because they're rubber. And so you don't want that because it'll get hard and then it won't stop. So you want to check that. Also, as you can see, there's little grooves, little teeth in here. Once that gets worn down, you want to replace it. And you want to check it about every 500 miles to about 1 month, whichever comes first. I need to replace mine. So just taking them off and looking at them. They're not completely worn, but since I race, and of course it depends on your riding style as to how fast you wear out your pads for your disc brake and your pads for your rim brakes. If you are, if you're riding all the time, a whole lot, if you're going down descents a lot, then you're going to wear things out a lot faster. So you definitely want to check your brakes and make sure that they're not going to fail you. So another thing that a mistake that I've had people do is if you have a carbon wheel, you have to have a carbon brake pad. They make brake pads specifically for carbon and specifically for aluminum or alloy rims. And a lot of people, they have an extra wheel that's an alloy, and they will use that for their trainer. And if it's just it's not a smart trainer, then they'll put that on their bike. Well, you have to change your brake pads out too. If you change from a carbon wheel to an alloy rim, change your brake pads because they're not going to mesh right. You're either going to wear your brake pads out or it's not going to grip properly, and you're not going to be able to stop if you don't put your carbon wheel back on, or vice versa. So let's see, is there any questions about brake pads? Here we go, we've got a few questions. So let's see, can you clamp to the carbon seat post when working on a bike? Yes, you can. The seat post is designed just a little bit differently. And if you don't ever want to clamp too tight on a seat post, but tight enough to hold it. You can generally, because of how the makeup of the seat post is, it's just, you're not going to crush it like you would the frame. It's made for more of an impact, and that's the safe way to clamp anything in a bike stand. Let's see, issue of helping the key. So with the issue on brake on carbon brakes, so is that a rim brake? Hang on just a second, sorry. I guess on the carbon brakes, what it's meaning is the carbon rims. You want to make sure that your brake cables are adjusted properly so that you don't have too much play in them. You want to be able to have some that are very responsive. And you can also adjust that right here, the cable tension of your brake. So if you want something that's not too responsive, then you go out like this. And if you want it to be more responsive, then you tighten it up like that so it's closer to the rim. And that will help you to brake harder and faster. It'll give you more strength whenever you're pulling on the lever. Okay, one more question. Okay, so this is regarding to disc brakes. The rubbing that happens seems like the wheel or rotor may not be aligned properly. Is there a good technique to fix it? Okay, yes. So first thing to check is make sure your wheel is seated in the frame properly. And so if it's a quick release, those have the most trouble. You want to put your bike down on the ground so it has the weight of the bike and gravity that's setting that wheel in. You want to make sure that your wheel is in straight and that it's not crooked. And then you want to reclamp it and make sure that it's seated right. If the rotor is still bent, if it's still ticking and rubbing, then there is a few different things that you can do. If it's a tick, then your rotor is bent, and that's where this will come in handy, is to bend it back, and you just go over the brake, over the rotor in that area, and you can kind of look down and see and squeeze it with that guy. So if it's a constant rub, then most likely your wheel is not in straight. That, or the one thing that you may have done is when your wheel was out, you squeezed your brake. Don't ever, with a disc brake, do not ever, ever, ever squeeze your brake while the wheel is out, because it'll cause those calipers to go in and then they'll stay in. And then that's where this guy comes in. So you have to take your wheel out and you'll have to wedge that up in between and spread those calipers apart. So these are a lot of tools that, you know, this one, it's handy. If you ever take your wheel in and out or travel, then this guy is a good one to have. This is from Park Tools. It's a PP 1.2. So yeah, if you travel, that would be good if you have disc brakes. That way, if that happens accidentally during moving around, then you can fix it. Let's see, here's another one. Okay, repeat how thick the pads need to be in millimeter caliper pads. So yes, they are normally, they're brand new, they're 3 to 4 millimeters thick. And when they get down to 1.5 millimeters, that's when you need to replace them. If they start squealing a whole lot, then that also is an indicator that, again, that they're too worn. So you might need to check them then. Again, depending upon your riding style, that matters as to how fast you wear those out. How, you know, if you're doing a lot of descents, if you are going really fast and stopping all of a sudden, that will tend to wear it out a lot faster. So, you know, again, check them every once a month if you're an avid rider, or every 500 miles. And if you do mountain descents quite often, then maybe even sooner, especially if there's squealing going on. Okay, and yes, the pad grooves still need to be visible. So I'm guessing we're talking about for rim brakes, the grooves need to be visible. Like these are not, this isn't too bad. It's not too worn. Once it gets flat, then it's way past time. So these are the little grooves. And when it gets, you know, I could try to flatten that out a little bit more. I could use these a little bit longer, but so again, since I race, I want to have good stopping power. So I change things out a little more often than just if you go on a general bike ride, you would have to. But for safety, I've got to kind of keep everything up a little bit more new. And okay. So any other questions about brakes, how to clean your rotors, how to deal with squealing, real quick before I move on to the next subject? Nothing. Okay. So next I'm going to talk about is actually I'm going to go into the chain. The chain is kind of the heart of your bicycle. It's so important to keep it in good health. So it's absolutely vital. If you leave it unattended, the internal parts, which are the rivets and the rollers inside the chain, they will get stretched, and they'll get worn out, and it'll start to show stretch. So one thing, this is a tool that I highly recommend everyone having. If you ride a bike, get this tool. It is the CC 3.2 from Park Tools. It is a chain checker, and it helps you. It has these little numbers right here. There's a 0.73, sorry, 5.75, and then a 0.5. And that is, you know, 50% wear or 75% wear. And so what you want to do is go to your chain and you drop that hook in first, and you try to see if you can fit it down right in here. And so my chain's good. You usually want to start with the 50%. So that's this side, and you try to fit it down. And if it doesn't go down, then I'm good. This chain is actually almost brand new, so I do not have wear. It will go down flat if it's 50% worn. And if so, then you want to turn it and check to see, okay, well, is it 75% worn? If so, and it goes flat, then it's way past time for you to change your chain. Now, if you have an 11 or 12 speed chain, you're going to want to change your chain out at the 50% worn. If you have a 10 speed or less, you can let it go to 75% worn. If you are riding a single speed, then you can go to 1% worn. This doesn't have that indicator on there, but some do. They'll have a 1.0 on there, and that's what that means. It's for a single speed. But for road bikes and whatnot, we need to pay attention to, okay, if you have 11, 12 gears, once your chain is 50% worn, change it. A chain will last anywhere like 2,000 miles if you're just a regular rider. So that's around a little over 3,200 kilometers. So if you've ridden that far, then you want to definitely change your chain out. Then another way, if you don't have this tool that you can check your chain, is you can actually lift the chain, try to lift it off this front cog, put it in the big cog, and then lift. And if you see a lot of daylight in between the chain and the cogs, then you've got too much stretch and you need to change your chain out. Again, mine doesn't have that because this is a fairly new chain. That's one easy technique if you don't have this tool yet and you're wondering. Another way is you can get a metal ruler. And so, of course, this is in, well, it should have some 12 inches. It's in inches, how we measure it. But you'll put it right in the center, the ruler right in the center of one rivet, and then you'll line the 0 mark up on the ruler, and then you'll line, it should go to the 12 right in the middle of the 24th rivet. So you could count 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 24, and the 12 mark should be right in the center, and the 0 mark should be right in the center of the first one. So those are two, like, at home if you don't have a chain checker tool. But I do highly recommend getting this just so you can make sure that your chain is properly maintained, along with cleaning it normally. If you don't clean your chain normally or regularly, then the buildup of dust and particles can also wear your chain out faster. Again, it depends on your riding style, how you're riding. If you are grinding in your big gear a lot and you're in your hardest gear back here a lot, you're going to wear your chain out faster because it's just more stress. If you're doing a lot of climbs on your bicycle and you're really pushing down on it, you're going to wear your chain out again. And it's the internal parts that get worn out, the little things that are spinning, which are the rivets or bearings, you could call them. So the thing about also the reason why you want to keep your chain in good health is because when those rivets start wearing and the bearings start moving inside, then it causes lots of issues back here. A lot of people think that maybe their derailleur needs adjusting, but their derailleur is actually fine. Their chain's worn out. So when their chain is worn out, then it doesn't mesh properly with the cogs and the cassette. So it will jump in the back all over the place. It'll start skipping whenever you're changing gears. It won't change real smooth, but that's because the chain's stretched out. Then what it will also do is it will start wearing your teeth out on your cassette and your cogs as well. And so that can get extremely costly if you're wearing these cogs out. It actually, here in the US, it costs several hundreds of dollars to try to replace everything with labor and whatnot. So you could get, my chain cost me $75. This is how much this chain costs. So you could spend $75 on a really nice chain, or $8 on a normal chain, or a few $100s if you don't change out your chain in enough time. So definitely do that. Two little quick things I want to show you is a quick link. So say you're on a ride and your chain breaks. So here's a couple of tools that you can have with you on the ride so that you don't have to call somebody to come help you. So what you'll need is a chain brake. And this is a smaller one that you could pack in there. It is real easy to use. Spin it, you fit the chain down right inside there and clamp it on, and then you push the broken pin out. Here is the big guy of this that you see in the shops, but this isn't, travel friendly for whenever you're riding. So this one, they do sell in shops for you, so you can go find that. And so say that the chain broke right here at that pin. So that one's gone. So you'll need to take this guy out. It'll be dangling there with the two little pieces. So you'll fit the chain brake right in like this, and then clamp it down, and you get right there on the rivet, and you keep spinning and spinning until it pushes the pin completely out, and it'll break that link free. It'll be completely free. So that one will be gone. Well, you have to replace it. So that's when your quick link comes in. So you can keep one of these in your bag with you. So also something to know is that these are specific to your chain. So if you have an 11 speed, you want an 11 speed quick link. If you have a 10 speed, you want a 10 speed quick link. Whatever it does, whatever it is for your chain. So then you'll have your, you'll want to save those little rivets, the little bearings that are inside there, not the rivets, but the bearings. And you'll push that one in there like that, and that in there like that, and it'll go together. And then like that. And the way to get it to snap, you'll want it to snap, is, so if you worked on it down here, you're going to want to spin it to where it's up here, hold your wheel and push down on it like that. And it should snap into place together real quick. You want to make sure before you take off and start riding though, that it does not look like that, that it does not have that gap right there. You want that pin pushed all the way to the end. So that's one way to save yourself if you have a chain break while you're out on a ride. It's not too hard to install these. It's really simple. Don't be scared. So that's all you need is those 2 items for you to be able to save yourself and be able to go ride back home. That's actually happened to me on a ride. I was climbing up a hill in my biggest gears and chain didn't like it. Let's see, do y'all have any questions about that? Decrease the chain without making a mess. Okay, degrease. Chains are messy. No, there's not really a great way. If you keep your chain cleaned often, then you don't have as big of a mess. So I use a product called Rock and Roll Gold. I don't know that it's in Europe. I'm not sure where all they sell it. Whatever your favorite bike chain lube is, get that. Make sure it's for a road bike. And you can get a rag, and you can douse your chain in that stuff. I use one that is not only a lube, but it is also a degreaser. And so I will pour it on my chain, and then I get a rag, clean rag, and I just spin and spin, and then I'll do it again. You don't want your chain greasy. You never want your chain to be greasy, because what that does is it collects all the dust from the road and it will get buried inside your bearings. So a chain, the outside shouldn't be oily. The oil gets down inside of the balls, so it'll be down in there. That's where it should be. It shouldn't be all over your chain. So making sure that your chain is good and clean. It's a lot to clean it after every ride, but if you can, a chain will last so much longer. If you spend a lot of money on a chain like what this one costs, then you definitely want it to last as long as possible. And so that's really the best way to just keep it clean. Let me see, there's some more questions here. So sorry, just a second, gotta scroll down. Okay, so about a new chain. It's been indoors for 2 months, not using my own rear wheel and cassette. Just bought a new chain ready to get back outside. Well, I need to change the cassette too. It depends on the cassette. If your cassette is, say it's an 11-speed and your chain is a 9-speed, then yeah, those won't mesh well. But if it's just, honestly, if you feel like your chain's been skipping on the cassette, then there might be some issues with the teeth on your cassettes. But you shouldn't. A cassette should last a really long time, especially if you take care of your chains. If you notice that what happens on it is the teeth will get kind of like shark finned. They won't be square on the top. So see how these are squared off? It'll be rounded and it'll look kind of like a little shark's fin. And so that's one way how you know, okay, your cassette's worn and you need to replace it. I hope I answered that right. Newbie. So do you have any good suggestions to clean a chain properly and easy? Again, you can use the chain lube and a rag. And if you don't necessarily have to even touch the chain, that rag covers it, and you just wrap your hand around the chain with that rag in there. And so your hands generally stay pretty clean doing that. The only way you'd get dirty is if you just touch your chain. One way to check to see if your chain is good and clean is you can rub your finger on it. That is what mine is. It's a little dirty. It's got a little bit of gunk. It's not too bad. That's normal, but you can get it to where it's really good and clean. You can take it off and soak it in a degreaser if you'd like, that's made for chains. If you really want it sparkling, I don't do that, but that's one way to do it. It's a little more messy that way, but yeah, the easiest way is just chain lube and your rag. Make sure that your chain lube is not only a lube, but it's also a degreaser. And so silicone-based chain lube for a drier climate. What's my opinion on a silicone-based chain lube for drier climate? I like them. I did a race actually where I used that, you have to completely degrease your chain for the best use, and then it has to sit. But I really liked the way it felt. It felt really clean. It was a good spin. I actually was racing in Boise, Idaho, and I finished in the top 10 and was racing with pros actually in that race. So I don't know if it was the chain lube or what it was, but I do like that. And do experiment with different lubes. Try to find your favorite. Again, I don't know what all brands are offered across the world and to you guys, but the only way to really find out what feels good is if you're out there trying it. Ask questions at your local shop and get their opinions. Everybody has their own opinion, but really what it comes down to is, do you feel the difference? Because if your chain is clean and if it's lubed properly, you feel the difference. It really makes a huge difference in how you spin and just how there's not that resistance that you get from a dirty chain. And it also saves your legs. Okay, here's another question. Current chain is definitely done. Issues were on the indoor trainer cassette, not actual bike cassette. Okay. So yeah, you would need to, you'll be wearing your chain out. If your cassette on your trainer is worn, then you're wearing your chain out. So if you buy a new chain and put it on an old cassette, you're just kind of defeating the purpose. You do want to replace that cassette. Make sure that you have a new, fresh, crisp cassette so that you're not wearing your chain that you just spent money out on, because then you're just repeating the process of having to replace your equipment. So I would get new cassette, and if you hadn't already gotten a new chain, then a new chain. Get rid of that old one if it's too worn. All right, any other questions? These are good questions. I hope y'all are learning a lot. Yes, thumbs up. Yeah, good. Okay, so let me see here. If your chain falls off, this happens a lot on rides where people are just going along and their chain just completely comes off. The fastest and easiest way, a lot of people fight with it and they're like pulling over the top. You don't go over the top. You go over the bottom, because you have give from your pulleys down here. So if you don't want to get your hands dirty, then if you have a tire lever or something, just some kind of tool in your case or whatever, and you don't want to get your hands dirty, then you can just grab the tire lever and see how much stretch that has. And you can just line it up like that. And there you go. So that way you're not actually having to touch the chain. I think I just got grease on my face. Happens. But that way you don't have to touch the chain. You don't have to get your hands dirty, even if it's on the inside. The problem is, a lot of time if it gets on the inside, then it gets wedged down in between the frame and the cog, and you're going to have to probably pull it out and get your hands dirty in that case. But if it falls out on the outside, then just do that real quick. Always, even if it's on the inside, the way to get it back on the cogs is to go from bottom and just refit it back on like that. Also, if your chain does fall off, that might be a sign that you need a derailleur adjustment. So that is definitely a key that, you know, it's the derailleur, your front derailleur is out too far, or it's tuned to where it goes in too far and it's not keeping that chain in place. You definitely want to make sure that it's in place. So if your chain is falling off often, whether it be on the inside, that indicates that your low limit screw is out. If it's coming out on the outside, then your high limit screw is out and you need an adjustment. Sometimes it's just a matter of, you know, you're in weird gears. So you're what's called cross chained. And that's where you would have, this is cross chained, where you have it in your lowest gear in the back, and then you have it in your hardest cog, the big cog in the front. That you don't want. You get all kinds of noise a lot of the times from your front derailleur rubbing, and it also will cause the chain to fall off. Or there's also vice versa, where you're in the little cog and then you're in the hardest cog back here, and it can fall off that way. So you want to try to avoid doing that. If ever you need to go to your smallest cog, then, you know, maybe go actually in a little bit more and then drop down to your front cog and spin it out. So any more questions about the chains or how to work the quick link? Okay. Nope. Okay, we'll move on. So here comes the tricky part. So with derailleur adjustments, there are lots of signs if you need a derailleur adjustment. Of course, it's a matter of shifting. So I use a mechanical shifter just because it's there. If I'm on a ride and something goes wrong, I can fix it. It's easy for me to fix. Some electronical shifting, you have to hook up to a computer, like Shimano. Shimano has to be hooked up to a computer to adjust your mid adjustments. But I'll get to electronic shifting in a minute. I'll briefly cover that because it's a little bit more technical. I'm going to teach you the basics of being able to adjust your derailleur and what happens if your cable breaks while you're on a ride. That way you know and can take that into electronic shifting, because once you know this, how to do it on a manual shifter with a cable, then you'll be able to take that knowledge and apply it to an electronic shifter with a few little tips. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to set, there's a high limit screw and a low limit screw. So you should be able to find a letter H and a letter L on your derailleur. And let me get, so move this out of the way and come look at the derailleur tie. I have my son helping me. Okay, so here are my screws. These are your limit screws that are actually on your rear derailleur. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's an H and then there's an L. So the high limit is for your high gear and the low limit is for your low gear. And then you have the exact same on your front derailleur. And sometimes they're not labeled. There's not an H and there's not an L. And so then that's a matter of, you just got to try to figure out, you can look down, come over here on this angle. You can look down and see, this is my high limit screw right here because it's touching the derailleur and I'm in the high gear. So it's preventing my derailleur from going too far out. So the way to adjust your high limit screw, you do that one first. Let's start with the rear derailleur first as well. You get in your high gear in the back and you get in your high gear in the front. So high and high. And so what the high limit, the only thing that the high limit screw does is it should line up perfectly with the cogs. So these pulley systems down here should line up with this cog. And the high limit screw, if I adjust it, let's see. So do you see it moving at all inwards? So it's just a little bit, but you should be able to see now that it's not actually lined up with the derailleur. So come back from this angle tie. So my pulley is like over here and it's not perfectly lined up with my chain. And so I want the high limit screw, I'm going to back it out. That means it's too tight if it's going in too far. So we back it out and line it up with that chain and that cog. And so there it is, properly lined up. You should be able to pull on the derailleur, and if you can't pull it out, then it's lined up right. But the purpose again is you want to line up your pulleys with that cassette. Okay, and then you're going to switch into the low gear. And then you also want to be in the low gear on the front. So now I'm in low and low, and the purpose of the low limit screw is to keep it in, to keep it from going into your spokes. So I've got a little bit of play there. The way to check it is to push on it and make sure that it's not going too far. So I'm going to back it out. So this is my low limit screw, it's right there. I'm going to back it out. So I'll give you an example of, see how much further I can push it now into the spokes. That you do not want. So you're going to try to tighten that low limit screw to where there's less play and it lines up with that cog. And just, you know, you can play with it if you can't find it. If you can't figure out which one's your high screw and which one's your low screw. Some of these, some derailleurs take a hex wrench or an Allen wrench. And so it's just the same theory, whether it be a Phillips screwdriver or it be the hex wrench. You just, those screws set only those two cogs. So once you have those two cogs set, that's when you do more fine tuning right here in between. So you're going to want to run through your gears. So you see if they're shifting right. There's a little bit of a jump there. If it makes noise, then something's off. If it's jumping or it's moving too slow, then something's off. And that's only for these in-between gears. So once you set your high limit screw to not come out too far and not be in too far, and you set your low limit screw to not be in your spokes and also not be in too tight, then to adjust the chain from shifting in these gears, that's what your barrel adjuster is for. Excuse me. So your barrel adjuster tightens and loosens the tension on your cable. So what it also does when it does that is it moves, again, the pulleys to be perfectly lined up with each cog. So I'm going to adjust it out and give you an example. You should be able to kind of see it moving. See if it's ever so slight, but it does move it. So see, my chain just jumped. by itself without me switching gears. So my cable tension is tight. There's also more noise. It can be more noisy and the chain can chatter. Hear that ticking? I'm not sure if you can hear it. There's a little bit of a ticking, a sound. And so, you know, it's not right. And so if I try to shift, see how it was lagged? There was lag there. And there's that ticking. So we want to get rid of that. The way to look is, again, let's look and see, switch and spots real quick time. So is to get back behind your derailleur and look and see to line it up. That bottom pulley, you want to line it up perfectly with that cog, and you can kind of push your pulley up to your cogs as well to see, is it lined up or not? And then also I'd go through, run through the shifting, see how does it shift. It jumps a little bit. If it's jumping, again, you want to check and see where it is on the cog. So it's shifting a little hard down. So it's still too tight. I want to bring that pulley back this way. Shifting up, it's shifting nice and smooth. But again, 1/4 turn. There we go. That's better. So that's how you adjust the derailleur with the manual system. So then if you want to adjust your front derailleur, it's the same. What you do is you get in your high gear, just like before. And to adjust your derailleur, first you want to make sure it's straight and it's not crooked. So the way to do that is you look down on it. Let me get a flashlight. So you just make sure that this part is lined up pretty straight and pretty flush with your cog. A lot of times these, like if your bike falls over, you crash, these can get bent, it can get crooked, and that can cause rubbing. But you want to adjust the high limit to where it just barely, almost is touching. Right up here is where the closest spot is. But you want to adjust that to where it's not too far out so your chain doesn't drop out this way. And then for the low, you do the same thing. You go back to your low gear in the back. Your low gear in the front. And you figure out your high and low screw, and you want to adjust it to where it's not quite rubbing, but it's really close. That way you don't drop your chain on the inside. And then you, of course, want to test it by shifting, you know, taking the shifter and seeing, well, does it move over? Does it actually shift? The front derailleur is a whole lot easier to adjust than the rear derailleur is. That can be really confusing. It takes playing with it, just experimenting. But if you can set your high limit and your low limit screw and really learn how to do that, okay, there we go, turn that off. If you can figure that out, then everything else is just so much easier. It's just getting those high limit and the low limit screw in the back correct. So any questions, clarifications that are needed for that? Any tip to get it out if it does wedge between? So if I'm guessing that's when the chain drops down and is wedged between the cogs, that's honestly, you got to get your hands in there and you've got to kind of just pull. I mean, I've had some chains that were stuck really bad in there, and you just got to grab the chain and just pull as hard as you can to try to pull it out and get it out of there. and you're going to get your hands dirty. Unfortunately, there's no clean way to do that if your chain is wedged in between. All right, so the barrel adjustment done only, let's see, is the barrel adjustment done only on the cogs where it skips? For the barrel adjuster, it doesn't necessarily matter which cog it skips on. That if it's skipping on one more than the other, then yeah, you can try to adjust it on that one. But that one's a little bit more free. It goes from any of the in-between cogs, and you're going to want to run it through the shifter. Make sure that you've got it right, just like I did, how I ran it up and down the cassette to see, okay, is there ticking in this one? Usually if it's lined up in one, it's going to be lined up in the rest. There might be one cog, it's just a little bit more off. Go ahead and adjust it in that one. But if it's bad off on one, it's going to be bad off on the others. Usually, if it's bad off, you're going to hear it in closer to the low gear and closer to the high gear, just because it'll either not go all the way down to the high gear or not all the way into the low gear. So if your barrel adjuster is too tight, then that can cause the issue as well. It won't go down into those proper cogs for you to be able to adjust the low limit and high limit screw. But you should be able to tell and adjust it by spinning it and listening for that tick. And look again for the alignment of your pulleys with your cogs. And if those are aligned perfectly and the tick is still there, then they're not aligned perfectly. They're off just a hair. And so what it is that pulley is rubbing, it's causing the chain to rub on that next cog. And so you just got to kind of adjust it a little bit more away from that cog, and it'll stop the ticking, and it'll also help it to shift smoother. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. Is a barrel adjustment done only on cogs? Is there a way to adjust a 10-speed derailleur on 11-speed cassette? That one is tricky. They usually just are not compatible. There are a few brands that can be compatible, but normally you don't want to mix the two. If you have a 10-speed, you need 10-speed setup group set. If you have 11-speed, you want 11-speed group set. Usually there's actually the lesser speeds, like the an 8-speed, 9-speed, which are on lower end kids bikes, mountain bikes, things like that. Those have a derailleur that is adjustable, because a cassette can go anywhere from a 7-speed to a 9-speed. So those shifters and derailleurs are meant to do that, but as far as like your higher gears, you don't normally mix those. I'm happy to be here with you guys. Thank you again for having me and being in this class. So someone says, thank you for offering this session. It was excellent. So thank you. All right, that's let's see, Molly. I thought it was Millie. Okay, yes, this is so awesome. Thank you guys. Any other questions about anything? Any clarification that you guys are needing? Even if it's not necessarily about this specific, but something pertaining to what I have gone over. Do y'all think you understand the high limit, low limit screws? Heads, thumbs? Here's a question. I think so. All right. Okay, so I'm going to briefly go over electronic shifting. So you know your basis of your high limit, low limit screws. Okay, so electronic shifting doesn't have a barrel adjuster, but it does have a way that you can fine tune that adjustment. Sometimes it needs it, sometimes it doesn't. It is a myth that electronic shifting self-adjusts. It does not do that. So for a Shimano electronic shifting is, it's very technical when you're wanting to adjust it. it usually, some have this little box that is in the stem, and you pull it out, and there's a little button on that box, and you have to push it and hold it until a red light comes on, and then you're in adjustment mode. And so that's when you run through your gears on adjustment mode, and it'll kind of adjust it. If you want to fine tune it, which you can adjust like how fast it shifts up and down. You have to plug it into your PC. So for that, you're going to just have to take it to a shop, because it takes a very, very costly connector box that you have to hook your bike up to, and then you hook that up to your PC, and it has to be a PC. It can't be a Mac. And then you can get in there with the computer, and you can do what you can do with the barrel adjuster. So it's more technical. If you don't have that good, clean, crisp shifting in between with your electronic shifting for Shimano, you're going to have to take it to a bike shop. You're going to have a pro do that, because usually they're the ones that'll have the tools. You don't want to spend the money. It's a lot of money for one of those connector boxes. So then for another one, say SRAM, it's a little bit different. The adjustment buttons are on the inside of your shifters, like right here. And so if you want to adjust the rear one, you push and hold it until a light comes on, and then you can push it and it will kind of adjust. It'll make little bitty incremental adjustments like the barrel adjuster does. And so it just depending upon which, each one's different. See, it's hard because everything changes every year. They come out with new stuff, a new design. And so, unless I'm looking at your bike, I can't tell you specifically how to adjust it. There might be one button, two buttons. It might be a pattern where you hold the button, and then you can make the incremental shifts up or down with those adjustments buttons in there. But for electronic shifting, the high limit and the low limit screws are exactly the same. They're on the derailleur, and just like you would find them on a mechanical derailleur, they're there. And so you can definitely set those yourself with an electronic shifter. But as far as trying to fine tune the middle cogs with the barrel adjuster, or it'll be the electronic shifting buttons, that's a little bit more complicated. And I would say just take it to the shop to where you have a professional that is used to knowing the adjustments, knowing which way. If it is something you want to learn, then more power to you. That's awesome. It takes practice, and just if you're fine and comfortable with practicing with your bike, then just get in there and play with it. That's a lot of how I started to learn. Was I just asked a lot of questions, and I started just messing with stuff, figuring out, okay, what does this do? What does that do? And so definitely don't be afraid to do that, because if you mess it up, take it to a bike shop, they can fix it. Don't break anything though. Any other questions? Let's see. What tools do I carry with me while I'm riding, or you or anybody? So as far as tools when you're riding, it depends on how far you're going. First tool is nutrition. So you definitely want to make sure that you have enough water. I usually keep one bottle of water, and then one bottle with some tab in it that has, or maybe some juice, or coconut water, something like that has a little bit of sustenance to it. So that's your basic. Then always take a tube with you. Even if you're set up as tubeless, take a tube for what size tire you need, because I have been on many rides where tubeless tires have gone flat, and I've had to change their flat form. Thank goodness someone had a spare tube, and somebody had some CO2 cartridges that we could air that up with, because if you do run a tubeless setup, you have to have a CO2 cartridge to inflate and seed that tire back in the rim. If it's just a normal bike like mine, I don't run tubeless. I personally don't like tubeless on a road bike. Then I just take a spare tire, a tire lever, although I don't necessarily have to have a tire lever. I can do it without one, but you should take a tire lever. And then I take a multi-tool. So this multi-tool has a Phillips on it, as well as some other Allen wrenches. There's been times where my seat has dropped mid-ride, and so I've had to stop and tighten up my bolts. It should have multiple sizes because you just never know what you're going to run into. So one thing I wanted to touch on with the cable, this is why this tool is so important for you to take with you. So say your cable breaks, your rear derailleur cable breaks. This actually happened to me last weekend. So it broke, the head separated from the cable in my shifter, and I was not able to shift anymore. It completely severed. So then what you can do, so you can finish your ride and you're not stuck in your hardest gear here in the back, is you take that high limit screw back here and you adjust it in as far as you can go. So let me get my flashlight. So the high limit screw, and so what I did was, oh, sorry, I got to get down to my highest gear. Okay, so what I was able to do was just screw that in, like you're tightening it, righty-tighty. So you tighten it and the pulley moves in. So do a rear shot from here. So you can see now my pulley is not lined up with my chain. My pulley is right here lined up over here. So do it as tight as you can and see which one you can get it lined up with. I was able to go 3 cogs up, or really it's down, but so it automatically shifts now. I didn't shift it up there. It just automatically, the derailleur automatically pushed it into this gear. And so that way I was able to finish my ride and not be in too much pain. I was planning on going 50 miles that day, but cut it short at 40. Just because there was a lot of climbing on that ride, but it was manageable because I was able to adjust that high limit screw in righty-tighty, tighten it to where it goes in and it'll stay there. So if your cable is broken, you're going to stay in that gear. You can't switch from it, but you still have your front derailleur that you can, if you're doing a climb, switch to your easier cog on your front derailleur anytime you have an incline. And so that can save you. Don't call anybody, just do that, adjust that limit screw in, and finish your ride. It's a lot of fun. And you can brag about, hey, I finished it, I did it, look at me. Okay, let's see what else. If you were in a situation where you had to use a quick link, would you just use it to be able to get back? Or is it enough to finish your planned ride? It's enough to finish your planned ride. If it's just one link that's broke and you switch that out, you can leave that quick link in there for a long time. When it happened to me last year, my chain was still good. There was not any wear on my chain at all. And so I just left the quick link in there and I raced with it. I rode with it and it lasted me, let's see. I think that happened in the summertime, early summer, like in June, my chain broke. And then I put the quick link in, and then I just recently changed my chain out for a new racing season. And I do that just for racing. You don't have to change your chain out, but I also do go a lot of miles. So yeah, it'll last you. You don't have to replace it. You can keep it going. They're made for that. And so let me finish the tools. What all tools? So you got your multi-tool, you got your tire, you need a tire lever, and a CO2 cartridge. I recommend getting one that once you screw your CO2 cartridge in, I would do a screw on, that you can turn it on and off, because you won't necessarily use the full can of CO2 sometimes. And so it's good to save it. So CO2, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all you need, along with your nutrition and food. If you do are going on a longer ride or you're going far away, and for safety, you know, you can pack your quick link and your little chain brake so that if the chain does break, then you're good. You can make it back home. So that's two things that can happen: your chain breaking, your cable breaking, that usually end a ride. Flat tire, those are all the things that usually end a ride. So those are all the tools that you need to be able to just keep going. So tire lever, multi-tool, tube, CO2 cartridge, chain link, and chain brake. So that's a pretty awesome kit right there. You can take a mini pump on your bike, but those don't always work well. And if you have a tubeless setup, it won't work at all. You cannot air up and seed a tubeless tire with a hand pump. You have to use something that has a lot of power. So definitely you'll have to take the CO2 cartridge. Any other questions? Let's see. Are there particular conditions for the chain brake? So if you have a clean brake, and I had a clean brake on mine, and what it was I just, one rivet fell out and that was it. So I just had that one, and it just separated the chain at that one rivet. So I can actually take, a lot of chains naturally have a quick link. This one is how this chain is put together from the box. And this guy. So this guy takes chain links apart for the quick link. You don't necessarily need this tool for anything. This is just for me showing you. Hang on, let me get in my lower gear so my chain doesn't completely slap me. All right. So right here, here is my quick link on my bicycle chain. So if your chain breaks, you know, you take, it'll look like that on one end, and then you should have, like, it'll look like this on the other. And so that's where, you know, you have to make sure that that roller right there doesn't fall out. If you lose that roller, then it's not going to work. That's your bearing, so it rolls over the chain. So you just slip that in right there, and you'll take your chain brake and pop this loose link off that was broken, and then you pull it together. Always work from the underside of your bike, because you have your pulley that gives you stretch like that. So then you just fit it together. You kind of squeeze it, and your hands are going to get dirty. And then this guy's a little bit more difficult. Some of them are easier because they're little clip right there. Their catch is a little bigger. This one's not. This chain's made for racing. So one end, some of these also are directional. So pay attention to if your chain link is directional and make sure and put it on. So there we go. It's clipped in. To make sure it's clipped in, again, spin it around to where it's on the top like that. And then hold your wheel. Hold your wheel, and then you just want to do that. Remember where, and it snaps it, pulls it apart and snaps it into place. So that's the real simple, easy fix. And now that's only if your bearing hasn't been lost and it's just a clean break on one side. If you lose several links, then you're pretty much toast. That is the one case where you will not be able to save your chain. That actually happened to someone at a race. I had fixed their chain for them. They jumped back into the race. They were in their hardest cog. They pounded down on it because it was also going uphill. It snapped again, and so the chain broke in multiple spots. And so he was done. He had to DNF that race, but saved him at first. Any other questions? That's pretty much it, all I have for you guys. So if there's no more questions, then I've covered it all. We've got our disc brakes, our rim brakes, our brake pads, the squealing noise. Remember, rubbing alcohol, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a bunch of expensive, fancy degreasers for your rotors. Just get some rubbing alcohol. And then, you know, sand the pads. And then your chain, take care of that. That's your heart. You need that to function. Everything depends on the health of your chain as far as, you know, shifting and your cogs and your cassettes. And then your high limit, low limit screws are the key. So